So.
It is open to the public.
Welcome everybody to Taupō District Council annual plan workshop. We'll commence this part of the afternoon's proceedings with our karakia te mātātanga. Tuia ki te Māori o te whenua, tuia ki te mana o te tangata, tuia ki te pono, te aroha, kia piki, kia eke, ki te taumata, hui tae ki e. So just a reminder, this is being live streamed and recorded. Sarah, over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. And I've got Panau here to support. I don't think she'll want to be supporting on the rating stuff, although I'm quite happy if you've got any suggestions. Yeah, we're here to talk a little bit more widely about where we've got to from a budgeting and rating perspective, looking forward to adopting the annual plan, hopefully in June.
So just for the record, for those that may end up watching this later on, we have Councillor Campbell online and the Mayor online from somewhere in the country, compromised by fog, I understand. So thank you.
Perfect. So what we're discussing today, as I said, recap of annual plan and budgeting, where we're at. A recap on our general revaluation. So obviously we've had council workshops and reports, particularly about annual plan, previous to this. So we just want to recap on those. And then we want to discuss with you a couple of things. One is the rates modelling and uniform annual general charge, or UAGC. You can tell I don't say the whole thing very often. And in relation to the revaluation impacts, and then also the fuel crisis and budgeting update, the amazing work that Panau and the team have done to bring us some numbers today and what that looks like from our budget perspective. So, a little bit of a recap, and I know you know all this, but it's, helping point people in the right direction if they want further information, and to ensure that we're not skipping over anything. There is actually other stuff to refer to. So we presented the 2026-27 annual plan formally at the March Council meeting. Now that was in relation to seeking direction. So staff obviously presented a number of options to council and discussed the trade-offs in, cuts required to get to the draft 6.6 rates increase, which council agreed was appropriate at the March meeting. Now, why we presented that at March? Obviously, in order to rate for 1st of July and ensure we're rating for next rating year, we have to adopt our annual plan by the end of June.
Sorry, Sarah, just comment. John, I wonder if you could mute your microphone. We're getting some feedback coming through. Thank you.
All good. At the same time as that, we had obviously the 25-26 reforecasting information, which we delayed until April. Now, when we delayed that, we talked about the impact of the fuel crisis, that we had a few uncertainties, and that we were going to keep you informed as to what some of those uncertainties look like from a budget perspective. Again, Panau and the team did a lot of work to assess the contractual considerations and likely impact on budgets, particularly for the 25-26 and the 26-27 years, which have impacted the annual plan. A large amount of information was collated and reviewed by the team, as you can imagine, contractual requirements, supplier communications, feedback from tender processes, all coming through a central point, which I believe was you yourself, and all of that, again, was collated and will be provided to you by update today. Now, at the same time, again, just to complicate things further, we're in general revaluation year. So we do our general revaluation process every 3 years. This time it's dated 1st of September 2025. We had a workshop with Council in April to discuss the results of that draft revaluation, because of course that revaluation is still underway. We have issued notices, but of course we've got the objections open till 25th of June 2026, and then the processing of those to go before completing that process. And then during that workshop, we promised a subsequent workshop here to model rates prior to annual plan adoption, because of course, as much as we don't relate or we don't, you can't tell from a revaluation what that will mean for rates, we also need to consider the impact of revaluations on rates when it does come time to setting them. And then a recap from, I just thought this is helpful, recap from that workshop again. There's a whole pack of information from that previous workshop, but our average value changes were negative 7.1 across the district. And again, those are how it was broken down for each sector. So, obviously substantial increases in industrial, commercial, utility, and decreases across residential lifestyle and horticulture, dairy. So that's just a reminder of how those property value changes fell.
So I just wonder, are you going to address the issue of the impact that has on people's individual rates? Because I know a lot of people will look at their value, their property has gone down, therefore the assumption, and we know incorrectly, but the assumption is my rates will then go down. But we know that costs for council do not go down commensurate with property values. So I just wonder if you could address that. And just for everyone around the table, these slides are available and they'll be publicly available as well. Yeah. So thank you.
I think that is important, and apologies for leaving it out. As I said, we did have the previous workshop, but it's always a good reminder, because I think we talk about this quite a lot, that rates requirement is split, and it's like a pie, right? So your requirement doesn't change, or the pie doesn't change, but how that's spread across ratepayers changes. Now that is very individual, because as much as we've got averages here, it does depend on individual property and individual circumstances. But the long and short of it is if your rates has gone up more or less than the average of the district revaluation, then your rates will potentially go up more or less, but that's complicated by targeted rates, UAGC and other factors. So it's not an exact science, but the rates pie remains the same. Council don't collect more or less, but it does change how that is distributed amongst ratepayers.
Councillor Foreman.
Can I just check, at what point is it after the 25th of June that we'll get a picture of the general year-on-year change of rates? When do we get that kind of picture? Because we're seeing the percentages of the big pie and everything, but just so we can get it clear on, it means X average.
Rates increase. So the rates increase stays the same as to what was presented to council at that March meeting, and the council's direction was the 6.6. Again, given staff had presented the options and the things that we had cut in order to get to that 6.6, and there were a number of risks that we presented to get to that number, if you remember. So that 6.6 and the amount of rates we need, that stays the same. But it's just how it's distributed, and that's where you do get, with the annual plan, modelling from a individual property perspective. So we get what we call sample properties, which we use each planning time to show the actual impact on people. Is that? Yeah. But again, those are only samples. What happens with your individual property could be different from the sample. We just try and give you an idea of what that looks like across the district.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you, Sarah. And following on from that, what sort of an effect would objections have, because I can talk about my own district, of course, where people seem to have gone down. The actual value is like about 200,000 per property, and of course it's been a huge shock to people, and I've had a lot of telephone calls or people saying to me, should I object? Well, of course they can object, but what difference is it going to make if there's a revaluation on their property?
I think the valuers take objections seriously, and they will come out and look at the individual circumstances for the objection, absolutely, and it can have quite a big effect, the objection period. I'm aware that, and Jeanette's gone from online, but I'm aware that to date we hadn't received too many objections, although the valuer said it's pretty typical that we get a last minute rush. So hard to know how many people are objecting or what effect that will have, again, until the valuer processes those. So again, the numbers presented today are on the draft. I don't believe they'll have too much of a material difference overall, because there'll be movements both ways from the objections, generally speaking. Cool, I'll keep going. So annual plan rating, and again, apologies for those who know the Rating Act and have been around the table for a number of years, but our rates are set pursuant to Section 23 of the Local Government Rating Act. We set those immediately following adoption of the annual plan, and believe it or not, or long-term plan, there is an order to do that, because we need an adopted annual plan to then set rates. And that includes the funding impact statement, which is a very detailed piece of work that Jeanette and the team do, which has every single rate on it based on the rates requirement, what costs they are, and what portion of rates should pay for that based on your policy. So that first details those individual rates, amongst other things, dates, due dates and timing, things like that. And that is in accordance with your rating policy and legislation. The revaluation impacts always form part of this consideration, because you obviously have the overall objective to ensure rates remain fair across the district. So you always would consider revaluation impacts. And that is part of why we want to talk to you today, before coming to you with the formal paper, is in relation to what we've done in some initial modelling, again on that draft data, and the Uniform Annual General Charge, or UAGC. So what is the UAGC? The UAGC is a fixed charge applied to every separately used or inhabitable part, or SUIP, as we call it in the finance team. It is designed to fund costs that benefit the entire community equally. So these are costs that we don't believe are, should be divided by capital value basis, because they're of equal benefit. And so your policy sets out targets for this, although it does allow flexibility within that for application and discretion. So the UAGC hasn't been increased since 2012 due to previous revaluation impacts on residential ratepayers. If we had, or if council had chosen to increase UAGC, this would have exaggerated the pressure on residential ratepayers, which was already inherent from the revaluations. So that's generally the fundamental reason it's been kept as it was. So as a consequence, obviously the proportion of General Council services it funds has diminished over time. However, this has met your long-term strategic direction of balancing the wants and needs of the community with affordable and sustainable rates. And for your information, the current UAGC is $250, including GST per SUIP. So why increase UAGC? As I've just said, it doesn't cover the cost considered of equal benefit. These come to $602 per SUIP. And although we do have flexibility within that, it is an important consideration. This revaluation has provided the opportunity to get closer to the intended policy targets. So again, where we have been hamstrung in the past with revaluations that have heavily impacted residential ratepayers, that condition is not inherent now. The UAGC is very low comparatively, and though that's not a, I struggle with comparability from a setting rates perspective because you're not comparing apples with apples, but it is interesting. So I did get AI to pull Waikato and Bay of Plenty councils, and they range from $425 to $900, and the lower couple were the outliers. So we are quite far out, so that is, interesting to know. Wouldn't be a fundamental reason, but it certainly is, we are quite far out. It also doesn't allow flexibility both ways at the current rate. So we have been unable to provide previous relief or smoothing for our residential ratepayers either. We've used the flexibility to keep it low to ensure that it hasn't exacerbated the issue, but we also haven't had ability to improve that for residential ratepayers because we haven't had flexibility both ways being so low. And it's been previously unchanged due to revaluation impacts. So certainly could be a fairness perception if we don't adjust for ratepayers impacted by latest revaluations because we're now in the opposite situation. The proposed increase does align with long-term strategic direction of balancing wants and needs of the community with affordable and sustainable rates and policy. We believe our suggestion is not a material change from the long-term plan, given that, and we don't believe it changes the consultation requirement for the annual plan, importantly, given we are now in May. So obviously that was an important consideration, an important note for staff. So recommended.
Through the chair, how many ratepayers have we got, Sarah?
The number off the top of my head, I don't want to be wrong. I have a feeling it is 30. Oh, Jeanette's not there. Can I come back to you? Okay. Someone will work in the background. Yeah, 30,000-ish. Usually I have Jeanette behind me to answer those detailed questions.
So just apologies from Jeanette. She was with us earlier, but she's actually on sick leave today, so she's gone.
Yeah. Now, so the recommended increase to the UAGC, so Council's office's recommendation would be to increase our UAGC this year to at least the $425 per SUIP. Now, this is a middle point between where we are now and our policy targets, and I know they're only targets, but it does prove a move towards those targets in our policy. Although I do note we probably need to review these targets next long-term plan if we no longer consider these to be relevant, but that is a policy decision. It is a normal adjustment to make when revaluations shift rates pressure, just as you've at your council have chosen in the past to keep it at $250 because of residential revaluations fundamentally. Again, it's a normal adjustment to make where conditions show that there is significant revaluation pressure.
You'll be pleased to know that Jeanette has corrected us.
Oh, good.
She's watching it live. So she said soups are more like 27,500 and 24,500 for rating units.
For rating units, yeah. So 27,000-ish. I think that's close to 30.
I was going with 30, but thanks, Jeanette, and please look after yourself.
Now, so obviously this is a council decision, so you could also keep the same UAGC at the moment or increase it less, although again, I come back to the unfairness perception on ratepayers who are largely impacted from this revaluation. Or you could increase it further to cover policy costs. However, that is quite a large increase all at once, and we do want to make sure that if we were going to undertake a large increase or a material increase from the long-term plan, that would be consulted on. So again, that's kind of why we've gone for recommending the middle ground. It would provide future flexibility if the pressure shifts back to residential again, and again, that's just a note. We haven't been able to provide that in the past. Shifting from our current UAGC does give us a little bit of flexibility in the future. And we've done some modelling today to hopefully support the rating decision that you will make in next month when you adopt the annual plan and then the rating resolutions. Right, so the rates modelling. Now this is at the current $250 UAGC. Again, it's on draft revaluation and on our 6.6 average rates increase, which is what was the direction that was given from council. So under that you can see particularly large increases in industrial, commercial, accommodation providers, electricity generators and other ratepayers, and in particular those are storage. Some of our storage unit facilities make up the main part of that. And obviously a lower impact on residential, which is great, but we're also seeing, to have that, but we're also seeing that disparity across our ratepayers and certainly a lot more pressure in some of the other ratepayers that aren't residential, which again is opposite to what we've seen in previous revaluations. It's great to finally see pressure being relieved on residential, because I know there's been a number of years where those increases have been substantial because of revaluations and Taupō values.
However, Sarah, I would like to make the point that they're basically businesses that we're looking at across the board, so in fact the residential people will most likely end up picking it up anyway, so it is sort of a chicken and egg situation in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done some modelling at 425, which, as I said before, is the middle point. Now we think this does represent a lot more even spread. Look, still some quite highly impacted ratepayers there. We've still got some pressure on electricity generators, industrial, commercial, but certainly not as much as we would have if we kept the UAGC at the $250. So yeah, that's modelling to show what it would look like if it was increased. And again, that's a position that we will be recommending to council in June. Again, subject to a discussion today if you think we're well off or need to go back to the drawing board. And then we modelled, for your interest, the $602 UAGC. Now this is the total. This is the total costs that are within our target bands. Again, our target bands are targets only, and we have flexibility to apply when considering a range of other factors, including revaluation. And that shows the spread. And in that example, it does reduce a little bit of pressure on electricity generators, utilities, industrial, commercial, but it does put further pressure on residential and again not so much pressure on rural, and puts a lot of pressure on our other ratepayers, which are storage units and the like. So our recommendation is to go down that middle ground, and we believe that very truly represents the intent of the policy as well. So I think that was it from a rating perspective. Very keen to hear your thoughts. Again, I would hate to get to the 30th of June and not heard what you think around the table and us suggest a change to UAGC that we have to very quickly backtrack before seeing rates in July.
Councillor Foreman, then Councillor Greenslade.
Yeah, I'm very mindful that they are averages that you had on that thing. So when we say we've got, I think it was the 425 option, if you've got some already sitting very close to that 6.1, none of them were over in the residential space, how many residents are we actually thinking will be over that 6.6?
Yeah, we haven't done the detailed modelling at that. The averages normally are pretty good representation of what it'll look like for most people, but of course it depends on the individual property owner. As we said, we might have had someone who is, added a massive capital value to their property, in which case they might be much higher, or an individual property or an individual area, so it might be, a certain road that in town that's sold really well, and, that's seen as being a little bit higher value comparatively.
Is there any way of having some kind of picture of how many people it would impact
Higher.
on over that 6.6? I'm not sure how the data's cut, so I just want to know how many people are we going to piss off if we pick that option?
Yeah, that would be a hard question, and again, you're adjusting it. So from an average perspective, you're moving it a couple of percent, so it's not going to move substantially. So it won't move their individual outcome substantially because it's only moving a couple of percent. So if you have, if we go back to between 250, where we've got we'll take the average residential of 3.7 and an average increase of 5.6. If someone's already got a 20% increase because of their property value, that might be a 22%, because it's only going to move, a smaller proportion. The property valuations that have affected a higher change aren't going to be substantially moved from that.
So I'm just trying to get a handle on your question. Is it because looking at the numbers, everyone in Turangi is above that? So, sorry team, I'm just going to go that and give it back to you. Hang on. All requests off.
Do you want me to know?
Yeah, if you
there
could,
we go.
please. So I'll come to you next,
So
Sandra.
you've got two areas where we're at 6.1. They are averages. So how many residents across the board, I'm trying to work out how many will actually end up being over that 6.6
Yes.
total increase on their rates from last year.
Yeah, I can't answer that, and it'd probably be quite detailed modelling. You'd have to go into individual properties. But what I was trying to say is that this UAGC change won't substantially change.
Roughly in the middle, then there's going to be a number of people who are below, very few who will actually hit the number, and a significant number who will be above. That's how stats work, really.
Yeah, however, generally not, again, significantly, unless there was a large or a reason for a large revaluation movement. It could have been, there are various reasons why they are larger on individual properties, and they won't be substantially impacted by UAGC. Is that?
I think it's important that we get a handle on understanding it, otherwise we're not going to be in a position to explain it to those who question us. So I guess if that doesn't set, if you're still baffled, I encourage you to take it offline and get an understanding so that you've got it clear in your own mind. I think that's important for all of us so that we clearly understand, or when we're asked the same question, we're just going to not be any the wiser. Wahine, go to you and then to Sandra. Thank you.
So, Sarah, my take on it is that we have had this figure, which is the UAGC, since 2012, and that figure has been on the lower end of the spectrum comparatively in comparison to other districts. What you have provided us as a modelling of increasing that UAGC, because can you change the slide back to what it is currently? 250, if you look at all of the average rate changes, electricity, industrial, commercial, they're quite high, and by increasing the UAGC to the next slide, what you guys are proposing, that would balance out. The average rate change across all ratepayers, and not just not just directly try to provide relief to one specific category of ratepayers, which is residential. It seems like the UAGC is kind of being used to balance out the differences, to provide a bit more equal treatment to all ratepayers across the district and not just residential. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. So part of the strategy, absolutely, you've nailed that. Part of the strategy is obviously to keep rates fair and sustainable, and in order to do that there does have to be some balancing. We have been unable to do that balancing in the past by reducing UAGC because it was so low, but we didn't increase it as a council because UAGC would have then impacted the residential ratepayers who were already seeing large increases from it, not from the UAGC, from the revaluations.
And just and supplementary to that, so the UAGC cost is a completely separate cost on top of the 6.6% proposed rates increase, or is it absorbed within that 6.6%?
Yeah, it's inclusive. It's just how we split the pie. So again, that's it doesn't change the overall total. The rates requirement remain the same. It's just how we split the pie, and it's ensuring that pie is split fairly and equally across the district, and there aren't ratepayers unfairly impacted.
Sandra.
There's sort of two questions, Sarah. The first one was, can you explain, probably to those people who are listening, what the rationale was to keep that UAGC low for so long?
Again, we saw substantial revaluation increases over the past couple of revaluations, particularly related to residential comparatively. Of course, if we had have increased it again to the target policy costs, which are a target, and we do mention that there are other factors that we need to consider, but we did not increase it to those target costs because it would have further put pressure on residential ratepayers. So that's been one of the primary drivers, is again that overall strategy of ensuring rates are fair and affordable for the whole community.
I am a great believer in the UAGC, I have to say. It feels like a blunt instrument, but it's actually quite fair. But we're going to have to be very clear when we put our rates out, because that's a line on the rates which people are going to see, which was basically double from last time, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, it's important to note that doesn't double our rates take. It just changed the proportion of the pie. And again, one of those key considerations is how revaluations have affected that pie anyway, and if we can provide relief across all of our ratepayers, that's ideal.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate how much work goes into all of this, and I think just helping the communities understand it. A question I often get is, what do our rates pay for? So I just wonder if council has done any sort of comparison where they see, so rates are all taken all together and then services, etc., that are distributed. Has council done any sort of comparison with what areas receive what?
So not so much area from a, what we'd previously use as a ward boundary, but certainly what services do they pay for. We do a graph, I believe, unless my memory is incorrectly serving me, but we do a graph in the long-term plan which talks about where the rates money goes, and again, that's something that we publicly communicate throughout our planning processes to try and show, hey, this is what your ratepayer dollars are paying for.
Thank you. Yes, again, something I just get asked quite often, especially out in Mangakino. We don't always see what's coming into our community, and certainly we can't have the same expectations as like the town centre here in Taupo, but just to be able to explain to people what it is they're actually paying for.
Yeah, Thank you, Councillor. Understandably, because we don't split costs by ward, we don't also, now keep those costs by ward, so that's been the challenge. We've been asked Lagoima in the past, particularly related to different communities, about how much is exactly spent, and that's a really hard thing. You think of our road maintenance and our waters contracts, splitting some of that expenditure out is challenging. But again, I would like to bring, I wasn't here for when wards were abolished, but the primary purpose of abolishing the wards rating system was to support the smaller communities, essentially with our larger townships, covering some of those costs of the smaller communities.
A vexed question, and I know we've been asked this a number of times over the last several years, and unfortunately if you look at some of the smaller communities, if you go, well, just give us and the rhetoric you get is just give us the money collected here and we'll spend it ourselves, would very, very quickly regret that if we'd start doing it, because there is significant cross-subsidisation, and that's how we keep the playing field relatively fair. Just a quick question in relation to going to 425 as opposed to any higher. If we went higher, would that trigger a need to consult?
I think in the policy, again, we allow for flexibility, but we also talk about our maintaining a low UAGC, and that probably is a little bit of a example of where we've been at because of residential, but at the same time, if we move to 600, we do believe we're probably, pushing that line of where we may have to consult, because there would be argument to whether that may be not low anymore. Whereas we still think that 425 is in that low category. And I did do the math, and Jeanette's, again, she's listening online, so she'll tell me I did the math wrong. But I did quickly do the math when I was, to have a look at what proportion of rates that covers, and I think it's certainly below 10%, so it's not a large proportion of rates that's covered by the UAGC.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions around the table?
Just a bit of a random question, but I know that we are looking to increase the UAGC because we want to apply some consistency across all of our ratepayer categories in terms of looking at it from an equal perspective. Is there a reason why we, or have we considered looking at it from an equitable perspective rather than an equal perspective, or are we, given that we are we're governed by the Local Government Act, is that a strong reason as to why we would look at this and try to divvy everything out equally, rather than looking at some of those residents who may be pensioners in comparison to those who are high earners?
Yeah, so your rating policies are not just your revenue and financing policy, but also other rating policies such as remissions and postponements and stuff like that. That is every LTP, that's what you do, and try and ensure that you've got a fair and equal system. Again, it's best for the community on a number of assumptions, and it's hard to get to individual property owners level, but certainly that is the intent of all your policies. And when we come to review the policies, if they are consistent with what we're seeing in today's environment, those are all the considerations we try and make as part of the long-term plan.
Panel, your turn.
Hello, how are you all? I've just got 3 slides, and then we'll go with questions. It's obviously a super summary of a lot of work, and I guess largely it focuses on the fuel crisis. I'm not about to tell you what's going to happen with that, but it relates to our contracts, our capital program, and our OPEX budgets. So, as you know, it feels like a long 3 months because the situation first unfolded in February. Here we are, almost in June. And one of the things that we first considered was fuel usage patterns across council. So essentially on this slide, we're talking about the fuel costs for usage across council themselves within forecast. So this financial year is less of a concern between now and the end of June. It's something that we've been working on. There's been a lot of good communication coming out and flowing down to anyone that's using a vehicle or a machine that uses petrol or diesel across council. We're fortunate in that we have a lot of EVs we can draw on. I think the carpooling idea has really taken off, which is good. And there's been less idling of vehicles. Having said that, even though there is a lot of proactive measures, I think that it's safe to say that next financial year could be a challenge because, for a start, we have a lower base budget for fuel usage for next year. And that's based on the fact that we're transitioning to EVs and we're making decrease in usage. But also, there's a real risk around exceeding that budget despite what we may do in terms of actual usage patterns.
So we've got a question from Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. Just a question on the electricity usage. So great that we've got EVs, and I've heard the comment in one of our previous workshops that we'd be looking at going to electric mowers, etc., to save on fuel in our mowing services. What about the impact of energy costs?
As far as the fleet investment goes, that's always considered in whether the investment is worth it. So we take into account our lifetime costs of the assets before we decide which way to go. So the electricity is a lot cheaper than the fuel, particularly around both our fleet vehicles and our machinery. But again, it's a situation where the fleet team do monitor those, and before making investment decisions, do look at the costs throughout the life cycle. So not just the investment purchase, but actually what it's going to cost over the life cycle before making that decision. And just probably a note, and I appreciate it's a little bit of an awkward one for Pinal, but we have done a lot of work in this space to reduce the number of fleet across the business, and again, particularly in relation to our cars, substantial decreases, which is why we've budgeted lower for next year. But unfortunately, the fuel, impact is obviously putting that budget at risk. But yeah, substantial decreases in our fleet in general.
Thank you for that. And just supplementary, that is a comment that I do receive from the public, is what is council doing with our fleet? Particularly, it can be seen as a hard sort of pill, I guess, for public to swallow sometimes when we're in the economic crisis that we're in and we have this fleet of wonderful vehicles.
So we, as an exec team, constantly monitor usage, if there are more efficient ways to do things, and the investment decisions, because it has been an area of focus for us because we're aware of public commentary. It's important to note that the cars, and I know this has always been a sticking point, that we do have relatively new vehicles. We get obviously we have a contract price through all of government services, and again we consider that in relation to keeping vehicles longer, and there have been times in the past where we have kept vehicles longer because that investment decision didn't make sense. So we do consider again that whole of life costs, and obviously those newer vehicles generally speaking don't cost money, and council often sell the vehicles for not too much of a loss from what we purchase them, again often quite good. So we do consider those kind of decisions. Getting into the very detail.
And if I could just add, I think certainly for my team, the PMO, we do need to be out and about actually checking on our projects. So there's obviously a certain limit to the baseline that we can go out to ensure things are on track. and the district is wide as it is broad, and it's important that whilst we can minimise that, there's a baseline. Go to the next slide. So this is a super summary of where we're at. I've come to the group here a couple of times just to give you an update on the fact that we brought together a fuel escalation team. We took a number of data points from our existing contracts. We reviewed the capital program. We got some external legal advice in many spaces. And I think we're in a fairly good position to estimate exposure. And I'm going to say estimate because when I first did a report about a week ago to exec, I think oil was looking at $103 a barrel. This morning it was 89. You tell me what it's going to cost to fill up your car next week. So this is like, you know, trying to pin the tail on a donkey to some degree. It's very challenging. But I think we had to develop some assumptions, and the information on this slide is really based on the assumption that what we've seen in the last 3 months will continue into the next financial year. And in order to develop this model, we took the assumption that it would extrapolate out for the full financial year. Now, I'm seriously hoping that's not true, and I think most commentators would say that there's a kind of a 6-month time frame, even in a turnaround, so it's going to have a long tail. But I think for the purposes of modelling, we need to assume that what we had seen for the past 3 months would likely continue for a period of time, but what we're doing is extrapolating it out for a year. So this isn't the top, like the best case, this isn't the worst case, this is what we've seen in the last 3 months. So we took the 166 current contracts that we have, which are multi-year, so they give you a really good indication of a per annum expenditure, and that sits across operational contracts like we have with HEB, like we have with Enviro Waste, like we have with Downers for Three Waters, and then it has capital contracts like the one that we have set up for the membrane plant's drinking water standards. So it's pretty much an all and sundry. There's lots of little ones, plenty of the larger ones. And what we found through this analysis, that if we grouped it into the operational side, which obviously has more of an impact on rates, we estimated that there would be around a 5% exposure across that. And as it has on the slide, that's to do with solid waste collection and disposal, roading maintenance, and aspects of the Three Waters maintenance. There's a couple of others locked in there around LDS disposal and some nuances of solid waste and wastewater, but that's the estimated exposure across that group. Capital contract budgets are also impacted, but to a much lesser degree. There's less that are in that high impact zone. They're largely around the drinking water standards, some capital roading projects and renewals, and that has an impact of 2.7%. So how you deal with the 5 and the 2.7, because I realise these are just numbers, what does it really mean, is that across the infrastructure construction projects as a whole, we're seeing an impact of 8 to 15%. So 5 plus 2.7 puts us right in that kind of zone, where some projects we've locked in at a pretty good price, there's limited cost escalations, and that's actually what we're seeing for 92% of our contracts. But for some contracts, they have built-in fuel escalations, NZTA backs them for that, etc., and that's the kind of inflationary rate we're seeing. It's quite a lot of information on one slide. Does anyone have any questions before I move on?
Thank you guys for that info. I'm not sure if we have been told this yet or not, so apologies if this has been answered yet, or the answer is still coming to us, and Julie, you might actually have the answer. So we've been told that we will go through a list of projects that will be given to us, and we will decide which ones we would not want to take on because of the fuel crisis and the amalgamation. Am I correct there?
I kind of talked to where we got to with the annual plan at the start of, maybe I didn't go into enough detail, but from an annual plan perspective, we obviously have to draw a line in the sand if you want to rate next financial year, because obviously part of the process is doing all the calculations and producing a document which is usually about 80 pages of reports and financials and stuff like that. So we had to draw a line in the sand, which is why we brought you the proposal or the annual plan paper in March. And that's where we received the direction. Where we will go going forward from here, and we will talk about mitigations, because we know we have to live within those budgets, in which case we will need to work with council during forecast time. So where, as Panel said, where there's no impact on the contract, and it's a multi-year contract and stuff that's just continuing, or BAU, that obviously continues. But for those other capital and operating costs where we need you guys around the table to make a decision, absolutely will come to you through forecasting. But Julie might have another comment, but I didn't think we were proposing a list of projects stop go as such, again, because we've made a commitment to the community through the long-term plan, and when we've talked through that process, the long-term plan is the correct place to adjust community expectations and make major changes to level of service and what we are and aren't delivering for the community.
Yeah, thank you. I was just under the impression that because of the issues with the fuel, and then now we've also got the amalgamation, that we would be looking at prioritising the projects as the councillors.
So, from memory, excuse me, we have discussed this. We have had it presented, and correct me if I've misinterpreted this, Panel, particularly in the roading space. A number of projects have been pushed back because taking, for want of a better word, a punt on the price of fuel, particularly bitumen, going down. So if we push ahead with some of those projects now, we're locking in a high price. So again, if I recall the conversation, if we were to substantially change the list of projects, that then triggers more consultation, and we have to go back to the community, and we were simply out of time to do that. Otherwise, we're not able to strike a rate, and we end up in a world of hurt in that respect. That's my recollection of it. Plus, you've also had a number of projects have already been put out to tender, and you have contractors who have already on board with that. I'm not sure whether that helps with a bit of context for your question or not.
Thank you. It does to a degree, but still doesn't confirm whether or not we will decide, or if it is staff that is deciding which projects will be going ahead or not. And just with the amalgamation, I mean, Wellington themselves have cut their annual plan.
I just speak to that. So there was the last reforecasting paper, I'm just going to check, we went to, April, was it? Okay, so there was a reforecasting paper in April which talks to the transport ones and a few other ones, so that was the first time. We obviously have the next reforecasting process, which is October. Yeah, so those are the levers that we'll be using to come back to you for the conversation around whether you want these ones to proceed or not. That's the kind of process that we're running, and I think that's probably coming up in some of the slides too.
Yeah, I was going to say, but through the chair, it was particularly in relation to those with changes, essentially the annual plan process, which we obviously came to you for the direction, basically taking the long-term plan, and there were no significant changes from that, and hence we didn't need to consult with the community because of the materiality of the changes. We'd taken a project list which is detailed in the long-term plan. So if you have a look in the long-term plan, there is a detailed project list of every project that's going to go ahead, and that's agreement with the community to do those projects throughout the LTP process and annual plan process. As we've discussed, the time to make the big changes are in the long-term plan. You can make changes in an annual plan process, absolutely, which generally require community consultation, and then depending on the degree of the changes, LTP amendment. which were the decisions that we came to council with earlier this year.
No, thank you. I do understand that, appreciate that information and the forecasting coming up in October. So, but my issue with that is the forecasting's coming up in October. These issues are now the amalgamation. We need to get our proposal in before the start of August. So that project list would be something that we would need to be going through before then.
I think the two topics are slightly different. So the fuel one, well, you've got an annual plan. Yep, you're right, Sarah. Thank you for pointing that out. And then the reforecasting will be the next process for the fuel one. For the Head Start process, at this point, the best advice that we've got is the LTP work that we were doing has been delayed. We've taken pause on that while we reset to be able to reallocate to the Head Start. It's not a case of dropping particular projects, it's a case of just taking a slight pause in terms of our LTP process. I know that's not a particularly perfect answer for you, Councillor Wilbur, but the reality is to actually stop and reset the projects, particularly the CapEx projects. Firstly, it's a different part of the organisation that would be impacted, that's involved in the Head Start process. Dropping some of those, particularly CapEx projects, would trigger the consultation process through the annual plan. It's more about operating and where we put staff and time, and it's particularly some of our key teams. So working backwards, the key teams that on the fly that are heavily impacted are our policy team, for example, and they are involved in both Head Start and the LTP, hence why we've kind of dropped some of that work. Sorry, that was a pretty much on the fly kind of answer, but hope that helps.
The other comment I would add to that is the impact of not Head Start, because that's an immediate now thing, but whatever amalgamation looks like with whoever, whenever, that's more in a long-term plan discussion. So 10 years from now, and long-term plan is a 10-year horizon, refreshed 3 yearly. That's where the conversation's being had nationally around, well, what's the point of doing a long-term plan with a 10-year horizon where we, and this is not just we, Taupō District, but we, right across the country, probably won't exist in our current form in 10 years hence. And that's a good point you make. But the Head Start and what we're doing now in that respect, respectfully in my view, has zero impact on the CapEx program right now through till the reforecasting in October. I don't know if I've interpreted that correctly, Panel. Feel free to comment.
It's a bit of a tough situation to get your head around, I understand. It feels like we're rushing towards the Head Start, but in actual fact, you know, that's right. The plan won't hit until 2028. We obviously need to take account for capital delivery, what we have planned, all sorts of things that are currently going on in the district when we develop that plan that goes to DIA. But in terms of the impact of the fuel crisis on our current capital program, that is very, very limited. And I just want to reiterate that the budget risk right now today is very low. What we're talking about with those numbers up there, even though they might seem large, is the estimated exposure if the fuel impacts are prolonged. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to go to market, find out that there's a 30% increase on a proposed project and then rush off and sign. We will come back and have a conversation with the council according to the prioritisation of that project at the time. But we're not in a position where we're seeing that at the moment. Mm-hmm. The one case that we have seen where something went out to market, and I think I did mention as a case study, where we went to market for a waters project in February, the beginning of February. There were some minor changes. We went back out to market a couple of weeks back, and the prices had increased by 8%, and they were still well within the budget that the asset manager for water expected that project to be delivered within. So it just depends, like we're getting feedback from the market on a regular basis. What those numbers there show you is that we need to be prepared for a possible exposure situation where we will need to prioritise in the future if the fuel crisis continues. And, you know, the fact that Reserve Bank of New Zealand kept OCR stable today. I mean, they're indicating that they expect to see this as a reasonably long tail. They have stated that they will expect to see fuel prices decrease, but it may take some time. So we can't predict what that will do to every project across the district. But right now, today, we don't even need to reprioritise, because there's nothing that's showing us that we need to stop these things because the money's just not there. What I'm indicating is that we need to come back to you as this fuel crisis continues to give you more certain information about what that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have better data in order to make the decision.
Thank you.
Sorry, just for clarity. Sorry, Padel, I know you were responding to a CapEx question, but from an OpEx perspective, that's slightly different. So there is a little bit of exposure, and the numbers we're looking at there, the $4 million, which we will talk about mitigations coming up. I just wanted to make sure there was no misunderstanding. That is probably a larger exposure from a risk and how we need to respond as well. So just wanted to clarify the OpEx risk there, not just the CapEx, but I appreciate you were talking about CapEx.
No, thank you guys. Really good information. I just want to make one last comment. The comment that you just made, Panel, we're not rushing towards Head Start. I'm just not very comfortable with that comment. We need to be very focused on Head Start. Thank you.
Okay, so breaking it down into our operational exposure and our capital exposure, and I do tend to err on the side of capital because that's the side that my team's involved in. But again, I guess it's difficult to say we're going to prioritise operational, especially in contracts that we're in. But I do want to talk about proposed mitigations because we've still got plenty. We are in the driving seat in that respect. And we just need to understand what the mitigations and possible ways to manage this could be. So the first thing is obviously setting up the dedicated team to review escalation requests, which is what we've done, and that's 6 of us from across the business, many of whom have commercial experience right now in terms of their projects, but also in charge of those large operational contracts. The bullet point 2 relates to the fact that we're reiterating internally that we do need to keep a much closer, more regular look at budgets and projects in terms of what they're doing. Increase that conversation with your contractors and suppliers. Don't wait 3 months, Sit down, have a convo with them next week. Get an understanding of where they're at. I think what I've heard in the market is that at the moment, according to the statistics we did on the analysis, 92% of our contracts aren't exposed. That means that, they are taking the fuel price increase on their side. Now, that's fine for us, but within a 6 months time frame, perhaps that's not going to look good for those businesses that we partner with, and we need to be cognizant of that. So we're having discussions already about what's reasonable in that space. I've mentioned keeping open lines of communication. We've sent out a couple of comms now, and I know we've got some meetings set up next week just to, ensure that people are knowing that they can contact their contract manager in the first instance when they are starting to experience fuel impacts in their business, because the first thing, we don't want to be responsible for people not communicating that back to us. As we mentioned before, I think Sarah reiterated, new contracts will only be approved within budget as normal. We get feedback from the market through a tender process. It may well be that we will need to prioritise at that point, but until we know how much over, if it is even, we should continue on with what we agreed for the annual plan. In terms of timing adjustments, we do have some of those contracts where we can delay, for example, with regards to a certain particular product within that project that might be a bit difficult to get hold of right now due to freight delays. We can reduce scope to ensure that we stick within budgets, and there could be a possible temporary level of service adjustment. And I know that that's something, one of the possible things that we could consider in the operational contract space, which, you know, will require a considerable amount of conversation. So I'm proposing through this group, obviously, that we'll come back with regular reporting, because I think this environment's changing quite quickly. Those numbers, as soon as I wrote them, have changed. It's probably up to $91 a barrel now, who knows. And as Sarah and Julie mentioned, the reforecasting process, even though it is in October, we'll be doing work prior to that in regards to what that looks like leading in.
Righto. Over to me. So, increased interest costs. So, I know we talked about this in relation to the annual plan when we originally set the budgets with you. In 2026-27, so the annual plan year, it was originally budgeted to decrease our costs of borrowing, but it has increased to 4.24 since our original discussions, and that was based on Council's Treasury Advisor update post-fuel crisis. The increased budget has been covered by the removal or reprioritisation of some operational projects, because we had made the internal decision. We'd already had direction from Council that 6.6 was max, so we had to make it work. However, just wanted to point it out, because if the cost of borrowing continues to increase, which it was expected from our Treasury Advisor, although noting RBNZ decision was not as expected, given they only have one measure which they are trying to control now, which is inflation. Inflation, obviously, the ship has sailed, I would imagine, for this year and probably next financial year as to what that looks like. So it was expected, and earlier RBNZ feedback was that they were going to increase. That not having happened maybe reduces our risk slightly, but there's certainly a risk that borrowing costs continue to increase, and the budget is possibly going to be exceeded. So look, there are mitigation measures available to Council, particularly through timing of capital projects, and again, there is a little bit we could do in relation to possible debt reduction, things like that, which we have already done over the last few months too, with sales of our commercial property. So yeah, just probably wanted to point that out. Would have been remiss not to, given it is related to the fuel crisis. I certainly see, and I know for now obviously looks very closely at our CapEx stuff, but our operating budget, certainly that $4 million, plus whatever happens in the interest space. And again, they're only possible exposures, but that's certainly a large number to look at mitigating. So expect that you will be heavily involved in any temporary level of service reduction discussions and the like, in order for us to stick to budget, because we know how important that is for the community. So I have no doubt through the forecasting process there's going to be a lot of work in that respect alone. Further questions?
Questions? No, here.
Just based on the conversations you have been having with our contractors, have any of them suggested that they're at or close to breaking point?
It's a good question. None of them have suggested that.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Sorry, just there certainly have been suppliers who aren't subject to that cost escalation, requesting meetings for us to have a discussion around, again, what Panel said before, the reasonableness of them taking on those extra costs. So certainly discussions have happened, but as Panel said, not so much in the dire space yet. But again, it depends on how long this continues, right? For how long people can hold that kind of cost escalation.
Any other questions? Wahine.
It might be related to the fuel crisis, but mowing across the district, are we still on a scheduled mowing schedule? Are we on has that schedule decreased, or do we still have a schedule in place? And is there now, in light of the fuel crisis, a bit of leverage for us to kind of, I don't know, not only make adjustments to the schedule itself, but provide the staff who are doing the mowing the opportunity to look and assess before hitting on the mower?
Well, I can tell you that from the original conversation with Parks and Reserves, initially when we first did our ALT, critical business activities based on the national fuel response was around, I guess taking a sensible approach, reducing, given that it's autumn/winter, naturally we're in a position that mowing decreases. I know from the Pulse call that we had earlier this week, Julie Gordon mentioned that they would be doing some spots according to some of the events that are coming into the district, but in general mowing's decreased at this time of year. And actually it did remind me of something that Kevin Taylor just mentioned before regarding the transport maintenance contract. We're also in a good position from right now today, we're not doing a lot of new roading projects specifically in that asphalt and bitumen space, so none of that happens till spring. So similar to Parks and Reserves, there is a schedule. I think it's been decreased a little in line with our expectations of reducing diesel usage in particular, but I think obviously there's still between now and spring to develop a what does that look like kind of plan in a world where there's a prolonged fuel crisis. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. I'm not the schedule person, but certainly from a fleet perspective and from a level of service perspective, we've obviously got agreed level of services with the community. So those will be the conversations we will come back to you and maybe say, is this an opportunity to temporarily reduce because of the fuel costs? So certainly something we're looking at, but in the meantime, the team have done a great job, and I know we monitor stuff at exec such as idle time. So we've seen idle time reduce dramatically. We've been trying to get those messages out on saving fuel as much as possible, along with the mitigations on electric vehicles and electric plant, which have allowed the problem hopefully not to be as large as it otherwise would have been. But certainly that's where elected members will be involved in those very challenging decisions on where we may have to reduce to fit in that potential 4 million exposure.
Yeah, and I guess the other one, because we are monitoring it so closely, we can say that they're within their budget for fuel because we monitor that. So, it's probably a slight alteration in terms of some of the mowing.
No, yeah.
I'm just wondering if we've had any information on what's been released today from the budget in terms of the Housing Development Fund.
Possibly not, Councillor. We've been in essence too. Yeah, it is something that we do need to come back to you on, but I haven't seen anything other than a bit of hearsay.
Because it has been released and it's saying that it will start as of this coming budget year, so it'll be interesting to see if we're able to access any of that.
So just to add to that, Councillor Woodward, there is an LGNZ briefing this evening on the budget. My apologies. Thank you. 6:15. So for all elected members.
All right, we're just about at time. Thank you everyone for attending. Councillor Campbell online and Mayor John stuck in transit. Good luck getting home. Sorry? Shortly, yeah. Have you got another question? No. Just on behalf of the team, Panel and Sarah, thank you for presenting today, and just want to acknowledge the extraordinary pressure both of your teams are under. I know the finance team is kind of straining under the load, and it's the classic, just when you thought things couldn't get worse or more complicated, another day comes and another problem emerges. And Panel, for your team, pivoting on the projects you deliver with such extraordinary challenges and changes, really appreciate it on behalf of the whole community. So thanks to both of you. We'll call it at that. Closing karakia, please, team.